Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd.
Well, hey everybody, Matt Heller here, founder of Performance Optimist Consulting and the author of The Myth of Employee Burnout, here with another exciting episode of 3 Questions. This is where I get to ask 3 questions of a guest, they get to ask 3 questions of me, and we just see where the conversation goes. Today, I am super excited to welcome Richard Ray Jr. to the call. Richard is the Corporate Director of Talent Acquisition and Development for Cedar Fair, and I cannot wait to hear what questions he has for me and also what his answers are going to be for my questions. So, Richard, without further ado, if you could just say hello and tell us a little bit about what you do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm very impressed that you got the title right. Sometimes I can't even articulate that correctly. But yes, I'm the Corporate Director of Talent Acquisition and Development at Cedar Fair. I like to say I'm kind of the fun side of HR. I'm the more people, the human side, if you're looking at human resources as I tier up to that group. But I get to kind of explore how our parks really look at attracting and recruiting and then eventually hiring and coaching our seasonal workforce. A majority of our workforce at Cedar Fair Parks is of the seasonal nature. So I work with the parks to try to establish what that looks like and try to help in any way I can.
Excellent. And this isn't one of your questions, but you've worked in a number of different entertainment companies before coming to Cedar Fair, correct?
Correct. Yeah, I did 15 years at Walt Disney World in Lake Buena Vista, Florida, everywhere from ride operator, I was the button pusher, all the way up to some project roles within the training world. I then went to SeaWorld Parks and Entertainment in the corporate office there for a couple of years, where I was a corporate training manager for all things non-revenue generating. And then I also did a small stint at Wyndham Vacation Ownership before Cedar Fair realized I was out of parks and said, hey, we may have a job for you. Yeah. So very excited to get back into the parks and been in this role for now just almost 2.5 years.
Okay, fantastic. Yeah, I know when Craig Freeman was bringing you on, he was super excited about all of your previous park experience, and I'm sure that has been wonderful in that role.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So my first question to you, if you're ready. A couple of weeks, maybe a week or so ago, it was announced that Mean Streak was going to be going away at Cedar Point. Yes. I'm not going to ask you if you have any inside information about what's replacing it. That's not the question. But the question really is about kind of your take on, if you've developed a training program or if you've got an initiative you're doing in HR with developing talent, and how do you know when it's time to move on? How do you know it's time to change? When you take out something like a big roller coaster, obviously there's a monetary investment there, a big time investment. Maybe your audience has changed a little bit. So I just want to kind of hear from you when you kind of look at all the things you do. When is it time to change?
Well, change is inevitable, and I think it's just a part of life. And to answer the question, I think we're always looking at opportunities to get better. So whether it's a complete overhaul or small tweaks, currently we work with Bowling Green State University on a leadership program called the Fundamentals of Leadership. And through that, when I got on board, I was kind of handed that program, and they said, hey, we need to roll this out to the rest of the parks. I said, well, I need to understand what went into building it because are we sure that this is the right thing? And we realized that maybe the order in which the training took place was not necessarily the way that we could see it applicable. It was very academic, but if we're looking for an individual to walk out of that room with the knowledge to directly apply what they've learned today to their work life, then yes, we need to look at those changes. And for training, I think it's just a capture of the moment in time. So you always have to look at those opportunities to say, okay, how can we continue to make this better? How can we stay ahead of the curve? And the opportunity to do that, I think, takes place with feedback. Some of the feedback that I got from the HR folks during the Fundamentals of Leadership overhaul really took place, and it bounced things off the walls and said, okay, so what will work and what won't work? And then really establish, okay, is this the right direction right now? So it is kind of being present in the moment and really saying, okay, can we move forward with what we have, and then looking at different ways of addressing the need? Because if we're not addressing a need, then why do it in the first place?
That's an excellent point. Yeah. So can I ask you about the curve? You mentioned being ahead of the curve. So how do you know when you're at the curve, ahead of the curve, or behind the curve?
That's always a challenge too. And I'm a team of one, so I definitely have to rely on my peer group out in the parks. And one of the things that I think technology is a great tool and asset to what we do, but it shouldn't be shoved down our throats saying you have to use technology. And I think that's sometimes the challenge within training, especially, is there's a lot of great resources, a lot of great software and different ways of doing things, but will it fit a housekeeper? Would it fit a maintenance individual? Would it fit a ride operator? And in some ways it will. I mean, we see Ellis and Associates right now from a lifeguard standpoint moving some of their content to an e-learning content so they can focus more on safety and actually giving you that practical skill in the water, which is great. It made sense for that function of what they did. So it really, you never want to be behind the curve. If you're way behind the curve, then things could go awry pretty quickly. And I don't ever think we end up ahead of the curve. I think at times, especially within training, you look at just staying as part of the lead pack. And within our industry, through those conversations, either at IAPA or ATD or other areas in which you're gaining that perspective, not even just in our industry, but in like-minded individuals, you can then gravitate towards, oh, well, maybe if that worked for them, how could I make it work for me? So I don't know if there's anybody who's way above in that curve. I think there's a bunch of us in the middle of the pack that may be just a nose ahead than the others. And in doing that, I think then we can keep sharing with each other and saying, okay, what's going on? And then hopefully bringing those that are a little bit further behind ahead, maybe with some efficiencies.
Yeah, I think the industry is great at sharing those kind of things, and you mentioned IAPA, and it's a great way to share a lot of the things that you are doing that can help maybe somebody that hasn't gotten to that point yet. Yeah, excellent. All right, so I'm ready for my first question.
All right, I get to ask my first question. Yeah. So I know you're the performance optimist, so very optimistic gentleman. I mean, we've had several conversations, but one of my favorite things is failure. Not that I like to fail, but failure is always an option. Those that say that it's not an option, they haven't really addressed failing or take responsibility. So as the optimist, how do you deal with failure? And through your conversations, how do you help others through failure?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I will say that I'm in the same boat. I like failure because I think you can learn from it. I think it's a great opportunity to refocus of what you're doing, and kind of going back to what you were saying with training. You might take a chance and it works or it doesn't work, and I'm sure you've been doing this long enough that you've taken enough chances to find out, okay, well, this isn't going to work, so we have to refocus and do something else. So I definitely enjoy. I won't say I enjoy failing, but I enjoy the learning process, and failing is definitely a part of that. And I think when you talk about helping people through failure, it's really a mindset. And it was funny that you just said that failure is an option, because we just had some friends visiting us, and they brought an article by Ben Carson, who was a neurosurgeon before he ever tried to run for president and things like that. And he wrote an article about failure really is an option. And when you look at failure from a brain surgeon standpoint, it's a little bit different than somebody working in an amusement park. There's different factors that you have to weigh in. But I think the concept of failure is something that we all probably tend to try to avoid, even though it can be something that we learn from. So I think for me, it's looking at the mindset of failure. Is this truly something that is going to harm you? Is there going to be something that, is this going to be life and death? And 99.9% of the times, it's probably not. So the failure is something that you can use to move forward. And, I love those quotes. You see them all the time on Facebook and LinkedIn about, if you're not trying, if you haven't failed, you're not really trying, and those type of things. And so when somebody says that, they just don't want to fail, well, you have to put yourself out there so that you can see what your boundaries are, and then once you see where you don't get to, then you can figure out how to reformulate what you're doing so that you can get past that point. I think that's the only way you can learn and grow as an individual, as a professional, as a human being. So.
Yeah, it's always funny. I see those posts and things like that, and you sometimes see those individuals who try to sugarcoat it and say, "Oh, it's not really failure; it's a missed opportunity." I was like, "No, it's failure. It's okay to say that." I think sometimes we try to be overly politically correct and not hurt somebody's feelings. No, you failed, and that's okay. You're addressing it and you're learning from it. But if all you're doing is learning from it, then you haven't really taken any action. So, in my individuals that I mentor is hey, it's okay to fail and it's okay to learn from it. But that next step, if you don't take that next step and taking action on it, then really you're probably going to repeat this cycle again.
Right. Well, and action really is the key to everything, isn't it? I mean, you can make a choice. Yes, I'm going to eat better so I can lose weight. But if you don't actually make the choice or take the action of either eating less or eating better food, then you're still not going to lose weight, or you're not going to, if you don't take the action to exercise. Wanting to exercise is one thing, actually doing it is another. So, I think you're right on that. If you don't take an action, whether you succeed the first time or not, you got to take some kind of action.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Yep. Good. We're on the same page there, it sounds like. So speaking of LinkedIn and stuff too, I love what it says under your name there, because it says you're passionate about developing others to see what they are capable of. Mm-hmm. And this kind of, I think, falls into the failure piece a little bit. But what do you find are some of the most common barriers or roadblocks that people may put up for themselves that prevent them from figuring out what they're capable of or achieving what they're capable of?
Yeah, one comes to mind because I'm actually mentoring an individual right now, and it's self-doubt. It's your own self-doubt on what you're capable of, and that's why I kind of changed my LinkedIn to kind of illustrate that, because some individuals, and sometimes I'm even guilty of it. My wife has said, "Hey, of course you can do that," and pushing me a little bit further. But there's that doubt a little bit of taking that risk, kind of like what we were just talking about in failure. It's like, okay, it's not life or death, but it's taking me outside of my comfort zone. And in doing that, then what do the gains outweigh the pains that I'm going to have? And a lot of individuals that I have those conversations with, they feel that the pains are going to be greater, and it's really getting them to identify in smaller chunks what they could do if they went in one direction or another. So I think self-doubt is probably the biggest one. And then sometimes even within our industry, we get so wrapped up in our own doings that we've been successful doing what we're doing. So why do we want to change that? And sometimes that resistance to change can really hurt you, because yes, you're the master of what you've been able to do so far. But wouldn't it be even greater if you were the master of not only that, but this next step? So for an example, I mean, I grew up in the industry. I did a lot of operational type things. I was a ride operator for 9 years, and a GM, Val Button, came to me and said, "Hey, we want you to go to entertainment." And I was just like, "You realize I trip over the trolley tracks on Main Street a lot. I don't play an instrument. I can't sing." And she goes, "No, we're looking for the leadership. So if you're interested in moving there, this will be a great opportunity." And I did that. I was 15 years at Disney. I didn't consider myself a Disney lifer, but an opportunity, they called me from SeaWorld and said, "Hey, we want to see if you want this position in training." So I said, "Okay, great." And interviewed as an external candidate and got the job there. And now here at Cedar Fair, my original title was Corporate Director of Organizational and Talent Development. And I was a training guy. I did a lot of training. And though I had dipped my toe in org development and things like that, this was a huge stretch for me. And the learnings I've had from Craig Freeman, who you mentioned earlier, Billy Clark, my peer, from an ER standpoint and HR. I'm not an HR guy, but I've learned so much from them that I continue to learn. Even at 2.5 years, you think I'd have a good grasp of what I'm supposed to do. But sometimes I go into work and I'm like, what am I going to do today? Which is very exciting, but for some folks, it might be scary. And so it's trying to balance those fears that individuals do have with those ways of saying, you're going to be this much further to your end goal. And it's really trying to establish what that is.
Yeah, because a lot of people have an end goal and they just can't see from where they are that big gap between where they are now and where that goal is, and how they're going to bridge that gap. So really interesting. Cool. Cool. All
Alrighty,
right.
well, I think I have a kind of a beach ball question here for you. So this one should be pretty fun, but also pretty easy for you. But I know that you also grew up in the industry and you were a frontline associate at one point. What do you miss about that? What do you miss about being a frontline associate?
Oh goodness. It's funny. There's times when I'd love to go back,
Yeah.
and be a frontline associate, because it's so much fun, and I think that's what made me fall in love with the industry in and of itself, was because I got to entertain people, and like you, I was a ride operator, so there was something in me that probably, as a ride operator, I like the technical side of it, the buttons I was pushing and the hydraulics and why this did this. And when, especially back in the day, when you would run a ride that you would have to actually, manually operate. Back at the park I worked at, Canopy Lake Park in New Hampshire, was a small family run park, so we didn't have, and this is like 30 years ago, so we didn't have all the automation and automatic braking and things like that. So a lot of it was done by hand, and that was a really cool thing, for from the technical side. But then, I just loved interacting with people and having fun and joking with them, and a large part of the population that come to a park are ready to have fun. Some are a little grumpy, as with any population, some of them are going to be grumpy. But it was just so much fun to interact with them and joke around with them. And a lot of times you had this finite amount of time that they were right in front of you, especially in ride ops, because, even if you were a greeter, they were at your area, and then they were going to move on and, go on the ride or whatever. So you had this very small window of an audience. And I used to love interacting with them and joking around with them, and just making people smile. So I think that's probably the biggest thing that I miss, is that opportunity to continually serve and entertain people for long periods of time, and then get to see them ride the ride and joke with them when they get off and things like that too. How about you?
Yeah, it's the same thing. It's that interaction. When I first started out at Epcot down in Disney World, I was a ride operator in Wonders of Life, and though the pavilion's no longer in the true existence of what it was meant for, I remember wearing what was powder blue pajamas because a part of Dome attractions. And at one point, I was outside of Cranium Command, and I went to the merchandise shop and asked them if I could take one of the basketballs because I was bored at a greeter position. And they said, yeah, sure, just bounce it around. So I bounced it around in front of Cranium Command, and I had kids like in groves just coming to me trying to take the ball away. And it's those small interactions, like you said, you only have them for a finite period of time. Recently, I was doing a little work with our merchandise team, and I got to experience being a frontline associate again out at Knott's Berry Farm. I was out there as a merchandise host, greeting people and ringing them up and asking them how their day was. And it just brings you back to that time where you're just like, man, that was just so much fun. You don't realize it in the moment because it is a job, it is work, but just the experience that you had, and the camaraderie between the other associates or cast members, depending on your employer. But it was just that moment and having that much fun, which I miss. And that's why I try to go out into the parks whenever they're like, okay, we have this project going on and it makes sense for me to go to the park. I go to the park, and those relationships I have with those individuals that are working at the park, but I walk all of our parks too. I just like to see the interaction with our associates. I like to see the interactions with guests. I was at Michigan's Adventure and was part of our secret shopper, and I was shopped. And I got a good write-up, so thankfully Camille and the team at Michigan's Adventure was very excited that I not only was shopped, but I gave them great scores. But it was really interesting to just remember that feeling again.
Yeah, I remember when I was at Universal, and I probably still do it, but in times when they needed extra staffing, people from the back of house, because I was in HR at the time, would be asked to sign up for shifts, out in the park, as a staffing solution. So I would always sign up for either ticket taker, up at the front gate so I could talk to people, or, greeter at an attraction, or even park services so I could walk around. And yes, I would sweep with the pan and broom, but I got to interact with people. So, taking advantage of those times that you have, I think once you get up into other positions where you're not doing it all the time, is not only a great way to relive that, but also to stay connected to what's really going on out there.
Yeah, we appreciate it. We at Disney, we had those individuals that we called them cross-utilization folks. They came in and helped us with Fast Pass or greeters and things like that. It got them out of the office, which they liked every so often, probably during busier times. So they were inundated with questions that they may not have known every answer to, but it seemed like they enjoyed themselves as well.
Yeah, yeah, and I always took the position, and maybe because like you, I'm an ops guy that got into HR, but I was like, this is why we all have a job. I mean, yes, you're in sales and marketing, or you're in finance or whatever, but none of that exists without what we're doing out here. So I always loved the opportunity to go out and do that.
Absolutely.
So are you ready for your last one? This might be kind of a beach ball question for you.
Oh, all right, the last
one. So you're a big sports fan.
Yes.
And I know that you and I both enjoy the Patriots.
Yes.
But my question to you is, if you could only watch one sport for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I would probably, I really enjoy football, but if it was only one sport for the rest of my life, it would be baseball.
And why is that?
I am a Red Sox fan, so I engage in all of the New England type sports, being born in New Hampshire and having family outside of Boston. But when I travel to our parks, I try to set aside some time so I can go visit a Major League Baseball park. And I think the engagement they have with their fans is so different than any of the other sports. I would say soccer is probably another one that's really close. Orlando City Soccer here has a really good fan base, but I think all soccer does. But it's so intimate. You feel that you're a part of the game. You could be sitting in the bleachers and get a home run or a foul ball, or when they're going to the dugout, they toss it. They just seem so accessible. And I think that opportunity from a baseball standpoint is something that they're going to continue to try to build, so that they can creep up the ratings. But I think being able to go to a baseball game, I mean, I've already been to 3 this year, no Red Sox games, unfortunately, but I mean, I had a meeting cancel when I was out at Cedar Point, and I went to a Indians Brewers game in the middle of the season, and it cost me $20. And that's also an opportunity where you can bring your family, and it's a though sometimes they can go a little long, it's that atmosphere that gives you that sense of, okay, they're accessible, they're right there. You're going to see some really cool athletes do really cool things. I mean, Giancarlo Stanton's blasting 495 feet home runs. That's crazy. That is just ridiculous. And not that you can't see that in other sports, but I don't think there's that immediate relationship there is with baseball.
Yeah, and you mentioned Boston.
Mm-hmm.
And Fenway is just a great stadium, but I was amazed how small it was the first time I went.
Yeah.
So small and intimate. So I think that really plays into what you talked about in terms of the accessibility as well.
Yeah. I try to go to Boston at least once a year. I have family up there, so I go up and see my cousins, my aunt, my uncle, my goddaughter, and I try to go to a game, but usually it's not there. They're never in town. But one time they were in town. Kevin Youkilis came back from the White Sox, and they do a lot of great foundation work. So a friend of mine who was doing those 50-50 raffle tickets said, "Hey, do you want to come with me?" Absolutely. So I got to just walk around Fenway Park selling raffle tickets. And then after the 5th inning, they let you go and sit and watch the game. So I was like, I can't beat that for free. I'm giving back to the community. I'm helping the cause. And those types of things are just really cool. And I think baseball gives you that more than some of the, and then plus it's 162 games. I mean, you have so many opportunities to go to a game. That's the fun part.
That's true. Yeah. Football season would be very short compared to that.
Yes.
No doubt. Awesome. Okay. Well, I'm ready for my last one.
All right, my last question. This is a question, I know you're big on culture as well, but this is kind of a culture / priorities question, and it's something that I ask a lot of leaders when, especially if I'm coming in to an organization. I asked all the GMs and kind of the directors when I came into Cedar Fair this question. But if you had a magic wand, we all like magic wands, but could only change one thing within our industry, within leadership, all the things that you do, what would that one thing be if you had that magic wand? It's not a genie, so it's not 3 wishes or anything. It's only one thing.
The one thing, would the magic wand affect more than one person?
It could.
Okay.
If it's a blanket
Okay.
kind of magic wand, yes.
I would magically make everybody communicate better.
And why is it?
Why? Well, probably like you, one of the things that I deal with most when I talk to different leaders and coach people in organizations is, when you really get down to the root cause of a lot of why things are going wrong, it's communication. I've got one client right now who we've worked together in the past, and we've done some really great work, and now we're kind of digging into some conflict issues that are going on, and as I'm learning more about the individual players, it really comes down to communication. And I think leaders have to communicate with one another. They have to communicate with their teams, and it can be so hard when you are a peer one day with someone or one season, and then the next season you're now their supervisor, and now you've got to give them feedback, you've got to coach them, you've got to communicate with them in a much different way. You've got to listen to them, which is, that can be a huge challenge in and of itself. So I think if I could change one thing with all those things you just said, leadership, our industry, human nature, it would be communication. And so much of that goes back to what you talked about earlier in terms of fear, in terms of a fear of change, that we have all these emotions in us that are driving us that kind of stand in the way sometimes of our ability to communicate with one another and our ability to actually share an idea. And a lot of times when I talk to people about what gets in the way of your ability to communicate with someone, it's that their mind is closed. It has nothing to do with the mechanical part of can they hear and can they speak. It's what's going on in their mind that's not allowing them to really listen to what someone has to say, or truly say what they mean, so that person can understand it. I also think that there's people that don't have a strong enough grasp of different communication styles, and they think because somebody communicates a little differently, then they're against me or they're out to get me. Well, no, it's just how they communicate. It's how they were raised and how they've learned to communicate over the years that they've been on the planet. So it's not something personal against you. As a leader, you have to kind of adapt to what they're doing and how they're communicating so you can get the best out of them. And I think that would probably be my magic wand is about communication.
Yeah, and I think you made a couple good points there too. One is the expectations of that individual that was what I like to say, peer today, boss tomorrow. And it's like, okay, I wish I had a magic wand for those folks, because there's not necessarily, it's just the radio and the keys. And I've been part of that. I've been subjected to it. And it's just more of, okay, I'm expected to do what now? And I mean, it happens in our industry. I mean, many of our individuals are seasonal workers. So sometimes attrition during the season, you're like, okay, you're now the lead or the supervisor. And we hope that through our coaching and guidance, we've gotten them to that place. But also listening. I had these conversations with individuals when I either teach a communications class or mentoring. I was like, we were taught how to read, we were taught how to write, we were taught how to speak, but when did anybody teach us how to listen? And that's a big part of communicating with individuals, especially if you're leading them. It's like, okay, how do I do that? I do the same thing with my 6-year-old. I was like, you were given 2 ears and 1 mouth. What should you do more? And sometimes he's like, oh, I should listen. I was like, yes, you should. But I'm trying to teach that at an early age, because I know when he goes to school, he's not going to get that. It's more of an expectation that you listen rather than a skill that needs to be developed over time.
And so what would you say is the when you say it's a skill, and I agree with you that listening is a skill. So how do you develop that skill in someone, whether it's a 6-year-old or it's an adult?
And some of the points that you made, I think the first time is just to open your mind, but close your mouth. And it's really understanding where that person is, because sometimes, I mean, even when you're dealing with guest situations or identifying a situation, you're already trying to find solutions to it. And it's human nature. That's what we're trying to do. We're problem solvers. And we're trying to get to a point where you have something at point A and you're trying to get to point B. But if I didn't listen to you, you may already have a solution to point B, but I've already blocked that out of my mind. So when I have those conversations with individuals on listening, it's first of all, okay, you got to open your mind up to what that individual is saying and listen to everything that they're saying. You're not going to hear every word. You're going to get themes, and then you're going to have to ask a probing question on what can you do at that point. And it's not to say, okay, here's the answer, or, hey, let me help you. It might be just a probing, okay, what are you going to do about it? That way that gets them thinking. And I think that's the important part of listening, is to get both parties thinking about what the next steps are. Because sometimes it's not just giving them that solution, it's getting them to think of what solution might be the best for that situation. Because they may know better than I. I mean, a lot of times you have coaches that come out of the woodwork and consultants and things like that, where they're asking those types of questions, because eventually you're going to solve the problem. The consultant's going to go away, the coach is going to go away, and you're still left with that problem unless you've come up with that solution. And I think really good consultants and really good coaches understand that if I need to get somebody to understand where they're going to go, I have to listen to them first and then be able to ask appropriate questions.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I definitely try to do that in my business. One of the things that I struggled with when I first started out was actually using the word consultant and consulting in my title, because I had unfortunately met so many people and heard the horror stories of others who, this person kind of came in and didn't listen and didn't take any kind of consideration of what was truly going on in that organization. And they just tried to, kind of ram things down their throat based on their previous experience and then go away. And nothing worked, and so in my mind, for a lot of people, that word consultant had gotten a bad rap, or had gotten a bad reputation. So I really struggled with that. And then kind of as my business sort of evolved, I thought, well, this is what I do. So in order for people to better understand at a very base level, when you look at my title or the name of my company, I do have to kind of have that in there. But then how I go about doing that, that's what's going to build my personal reputation. So I can't worry about everybody else's reputation. I just have to worry about mine.
Exactly. Yeah. And I think, I mean, obviously we have a relationship too, and seeing you doing your job and having those conversations, I think you do that well. I think the opportunity there to continue to develop that skill, it's sometimes I fall back and I'm just like, okay, this is what we can do. And nope, I should have probably asked this question, because I really wasn't in the moment thinking of what their best need was. I was just thinking of how can we move it. Now there's going to be times in which you don't have that opportunity. It's more delegate, I got to get this, rather than guiding. But when you have that opportunity to, if it's not a pressure situation or a sense of urgency, hey, let's do this together. But that listening aspect is so key to that, developing the communication in general, because then you're going to learn how to communicate with individuals better. Like you'd mentioned earlier, if I'm not listening to you, I'm not going to know how to communicate with you.
Absolutely. And I think to what you just said, there's a balance between, getting people's input and allowing them to kind of figure things out. And then as a leader at some point, kind of putting your foot down and saying, okay, this is what we're going to do. Or, sometimes it is a pressure cooker situation, or sometimes it's that the team has gone along, 10 or 15 people haven't made a decision, and now somebody's got to make a decision and go forward. I worked on a team once where we were trying to figure something out, and one leader left, a new one came in, and she said, this is what we're going to do. Going back to your question earlier about failure, she says, if we fail, we fail, but we're going to go in this direction, and then we're going to fall back and regroup if we have to, but we're not going to just keep spinning our wheels. Mm-hmm. And I have so much respect for that leader for doing that, because it just gave us a direction.
Exactly.
Yeah, very good. Well, those are all of my official questions.
Yes.
Did you have any other thoughts or questions or comments before we sign off?
No, I thank you for the opportunity. I've seen a lot of the 3 questions, and I know you did the coaster tour, and I was glad, even though we weren't able to do maybe the first live 3 questions at Carowinds, I got the opportunity to schedule it some time with you, and look forward to seeing many more 3 questions in the future. But yeah, the opportunity to speak and interact with you as much as possible is great. So from my standpoint, thank you very much for that opportunity.
Oh, my pleasure. And the feeling is completely mutual. And we've been trying to get this scheduled for a while, and I wish we could have done that live one. But like you said, the schedule just didn't work out. So I'm super glad that we got this time. And I'm going to go back and rewatch this a number of times because you had a lot of really great nuggets in there and things to take away. So I appreciate that, and I hope the people that have been watching appreciate it as well. So thank you, Richard, for your time. Really enjoyed having you here. And for everybody who's watching, if you have any questions for me, my email is matt@performanceoptimist.com, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Hey, take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I never get back.